All right. Hello, everybody. My name's Julie Hanson, and I'm here with Jesse Gold. And we are excited to have you join us to learn a little bit more about DBT. So, Jesse, I'm going to let you take it from here. You are a DBT specialist and a therapist who's been teaching these DBT Informed Skills classes for several years now.
hmm
And just looking forward to having you just share kind of an overview of what someone might expect if they decide to take the class with us. And it'll be beginning on, well, it's held on Wednesdays from 6 to 7:30 p.m. and it is online. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Julie. So today I wanted to kind of do an overview, a little bit of an overview and a little bit just of checking in around some of my favorite skills. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through kind of what DBT is a little bit, and then we're going to talk about one of my favorite skills from each module. So what is DBT? It's a modality that's developed, I would say, for people who experience overwhelming emotions where they feel like they can't control their reactions to their emotions, or their emotions are so overwhelming it makes it difficult to function. There's 4 modules that you learn in DBT: mindfulness, emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. And the way we do our 10-week class is we do mindfulness for 2 weeks, emotion regulation for 3 weeks, distress tolerance for 2 weeks, interpersonal effectiveness for 2 weeks, and then 1 week of review and special topics. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch on one skill from each module. When we're in class, there's dozens of skills for each module, so this is just an example of one. So mindfulness. Before I get into Wise Mind, what is mindfulness? A very quick, concise definition of mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, and that could mean so many things. So in DBT, the way we approach mindfulness is not you sit on a cushion with your eyes closed for a half an hour and follow your breathing. It's that in what parts of your life, how can you bring this into your everyday life? Paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. What is Wise Mind? Wise Mind is a big part of mindfulness in DBT. We kind of use mindfulness to get to Wise Mind in DBT, if that makes any sense. How do you get to Wise Mind? I like to think of Wise Mind as this pure way of being outside of the traumas that we've experienced, outside of our social conditioning, where we have this innate wisdom in all of us, where we can make good decisions, where we can have regulated emotions. But most of us live most of our lives in either emotion mind or reasonable mind. Emotion mind, I feel like I can really identify with that, where you spend a lot of your life controlled by your moods, your emotions, your urges, and it feels like you're on an emotional roller coaster all the time because every part of your life is ruled by your emotion. Reasonable mind is something that we fall into sometimes, and some people live most of their life in reasonable mind, where you're so led by reason, logic, and pragmatic thinking that you're often unable to access your emotions, or you often make decisions without using emotions. It isn't that either of these states of mind are good or bad. It's that we can synthesize both of these to come to Wise Mind, if that makes sense. Wise Mind is the synthesis of reasonable mind or emotion mind. Another way to look at this is this idea of reasonable mind being the brain, the cerebral part, the prefrontal cortex, and emotion mind being our idea of like the heart, being led by the heart. If we combine reasonable, like the brain and the heart together and have them work together in harmony, that's when we have Wise Mind. So I really like this little graphic of the heart and the brain holding hands, because I love that idea of like your heart and your brain friends with each other and working together as opposed to constantly being opposed. Like, well, I feel this way, but I know that the right thing to do is this. It's like, well, how can I bring my heart and mind into alignment? And the way we do that in DBT is using these mindfulness exercises to access wise mind. This idea of who are you outside of conditioning, patterns, and trauma. And there's a lot of ways to think of wise mind. So if that word wise mind doesn't resonate for you, there are, throughout the world's history, most world spirituality practices and religions have had a concept of wise mind. So if you come from a spiritual community that has a concept of it, you can use that. So it might be inner light, it could be inner wisdom, it could be spirit self, it could be soul. I really like higher self or true self. It could be Buddha nature, it could be the divine within. Another one that I really like is the part of me that loves myself. So hopefully this gives you an idea of what wise mind is. It's one of the first things we talk about in DBT, but it is the hardest skill to master, in my opinion. So it's really just, okay, this is the idea of wise mind. These are the practices that help you get there, to help you try to access your true self. It's not going to happen overnight. It's probably going to take a really long time of practice to get there.
Yeah, I think that's really, I appreciate you mentioning that. And just as someone who has been, taking the class with you for a while now, right?
Mhm.
And one of the other ones that I'll just throw out there that isn't on this list, but I know that I think you've mentioned it before, is wise mind is the sun behind the clouds.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah.
And so finding what that is for you, right? So even if you start to get curious about, well, how do I describe wise mind? You're on your way to learning and applying these concepts.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. The sun behind the clouds. Definitely. Clarity, light, like all of those, all of that, like metaphorical stuff, like really works for wise mind. The next thing we're going to talk about is emotion regulation. What's emotion regulation all about? I would say emotion regulation is all about decreasing your emotional suffering, reducing the frequency and intensity of really painful, overwhelming emotions so that you can get back into your life and live your life to the fullest. And one of my favorite skills for decreasing emotional suffering is this idea of mindfulness of current emotions. So once again, it goes back to mindfulness, but this is like a skill that really works for emotion regulation in particular. And what is mindfulness of current emotions? It's this idea of observing the emotion, naming the emotion, experiencing the emotion, non-identification with the emotion. So understanding that you are a human being having an emotion, you are not the emotion. So being able to distance yourself in some way from the emotion that's happening while at the same time experiencing it. So I am a person experiencing this right now. And then respecting the emotion and approaching it with curiosity. What is this emotion doing for me right now? Like, what is it trying to protect me from is a question I often ask. Like, I'm feeling this way. What is this feeling trying to protect me from? And how do we do this? I found this infographic on I think Instagram, but I really like it because it's like very perfectly describes mindfulness of current emotions. So I'm just going to read it really quick. And it says, how to feel your feelings, a thing that sounds obvious, but totally isn't. 1, an unpleasant feeling arises. So sometimes we know the trigger, sometimes we don't know the trigger, but a painful emotion will happen. What often happens is instead of feeling the feeling or acknowledging where it's happening in our body, we launch into a mental dialogue about it. Your mind launches into whatever inner story accompanies this feeling. So an example is, I'm unlovable, I'm a loser, I resent my face. And this is kind of like a harsh way to say it. It says, stop, you're thinking your feelings. I would just say, gently notice, gently notice, are you thinking your feelings? And can you redirect your mind away from these thoughts and into the sensations of your body? And then mentally name the sensations of your body that are happening. In its core, an emotion is a physical experience. Emotions change the physiology of our body. That's how we know emotions are real, because they are actively changing the physiology of our body. A lot of times when I feel anxiety, I'll notice, okay, I'm feeling like a tightness or restriction in my chest. I'm feeling shortness of breath. I'm noticing my palms getting sweaty. And when I am able to feel, label, and just experience those physical sensations, it takes me out of that mental dialogue that's keeping me locked or stuck or attached to the emotion. Unconsciously, I don't want to be attached to the emotion. I think the thinking is going to get me out of the emotion, but it actually perpetuates it. So the next step is breathe into the feeling or the sensation and allow it. And that might mean crying. It might mean shaking. If it's appropriate, so it's as if like you're not in target. And then your mind will really want to go back into the thought story mode. When this happens, redirect your awareness back into your body. It's a practice of continuing to turn the mind back to the body sensations, turn the mind back to the body sensations without judgment, right? You're going to want to judge the feeling. You're going to want to push away the feeling. You're going to want to cling to the feeling, whatever you want to do. Acknowledge it. Be like, that's okay. That's fine. I'm thinking about my feelings. That's fine. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn my awareness back to the physical body sensations. So take deep breaths, keep feeling into your body, let the feeling exist, so allow it, and trust that it will leave. Observe it changing, watch it move, notice that you have survived. So the next thing I want to talk about is distress tolerance. I love distress tolerance. A quick definition of distress tolerance is being able to sit with painful, overwhelming emotions or situations without making it worse. So these are like when you want to do something that might be harmful, that might be a harmful behavior, but you have these overwhelming emotions and you don't know what to do. The distress tolerance helps you slowly learn to be with crisis, distress, very overwhelming emotions without acting on them in a harmful way. One of the skills that we have in distress tolerance is radical acceptance. What is radical acceptance? So radical acceptance is this idea of accepting the facts of the situation without judgment, without clinging to them, without forecasting anything, but also without resistance to the truth of the situation. So my example of radical acceptance is, okay, so I'm in my office and I knock over my cup of coffee. A lack of radical acceptance would look like this. I knocked over my cup of coffee. I'm so angry at myself. I'm so clumsy. Like, now I won't get my coffee. It's all over the floor. This shouldn't happen. I'm a bad person because I spilled my coffee, right? So like really going into this inner critic, the criticism and the judgment narrative. Radical acceptance of that situation would look like there's coffee on the ground. I can't get it back into my cup. I have spilled coffee before in the past. So realizing like it doesn't mean I'm a clumsy person. I don't need to say I don't need to radically accept that I'm a clumsy person, because that's not a fact. The fact is that there's coffee on the ground right now. That's the only fact. So being able to notice like, what are the facts of the situation? And like, instead of I shouldn't have done that, it's just, yeah, there's coffee on the, okay, what do I do next? Because if I'm sitting there ruminating over, I'm such a clumsy person, I will never get my life together, all I do is spill things all the time, I'm gonna talk myself into a kind of shame paralysis, and I'm not going to clean up the coffee on the ground. If I radically accept I spilled coffee on the ground, it's on the ground, it's not going to go back into the cup, and I spilled it. No judgments there, just an acceptance of the facts. Then I'm more likely to clean it up because I'm not talking myself into some kind of shame or anxiety paralysis around the situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that it is, it is that ability to practice hitting that pause button, stepping back, and, just really, it's like, this is happening, I can't change it. It is what it is for now. Um,
Yeah.
this is a hard, I just want to say really quickly too that like these are not easy things to learn and practice.
Yeah.
And so if you've ever tried to do it and have failed, it's like continuing to come back and try again is it's part of the learning process. So
Yes, exactly. Like radical acceptance, it took me years to get to a point, like being honest, it took me years to get to a point where I actually understood what radical acceptance was. And I was actually able to embody it and start practicing it because it just takes all these things take so much practice. But I feel like once I grasped the actual content of what radical acceptance is, it's really completely changed my life. Like I'm able to move through painful situations without making them worse and without going into a shame spiral, really.
yeah, well, and it's like I practice radical acceptance every single day.
Mhm.
And so there's that too, that life brings challenges. And, like you're saying, it's like it's an ongoing, it's a practice, but at least you have one now, right? Like
Exactly.
whereas
Yeah.
before. And so it's creating that little bridge, um, radical acceptance, definitely.
There is 10 steps to doing radical acceptance. If you want to learn about those, you'll have to take the class. I do want to check in on why radical acceptance, and it's because rejecting reality doesn't change reality, and that if we want to change reality, unfortunately, we have to accept it first. And I have so many examples of this, but you really have to accept reality before you could change it. So accepting reality is the path towards change. And another thing is that pain can't be avoided, but suffering can. Pain is going to happen in life. Pain is inevitable, but suffering at times can be a choice because you can choose to accept the situation or to ruminate over it and increase your suffering. And rejecting reality can turn pain into suffering. And refusing to accept reality can keep us stuck in this unhappiness, bitterness, anger, sadness, shame. Really important. Radical acceptance is not approving of the situation. There are lots of things that we shouldn't approve of, and that we shouldn't condone. It doesn't mean condoning or approving of the situation. It just means accepting that it happened. Like radically sitting with and being like, yes, that happened. It's not okay, but it happened. What's next? It doesn't mean that you like the situation. It's the opposite of being passive, because it's a very active thing to accept something, and once you accept something, move forward. And it's not changing the situation. It, like, once again, it's the opposite. It is the first step to change. The fourth module that we talk about in DBT is interpersonal effectiveness. This one is amazing for relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, family relationships. And my favorite skill in interpersonal effectiveness is this idea of validation. And I'm specifically going to talk about validation of another person in this, or validation in interpersonal conversation in this, but self-validation is extremely important too. So what is validation when you're talking to another person? It's finding the kernel of truth in the other person's perspective or situation. When we validate, we communicate that we understand the other person's perspective. It doesn't mean we agree with what they're saying. And it doesn't mean making it true. It just means saying that we understand the feelings surrounding what they're saying. So when it says finding the kernel of truth, what's the kernel of truth in what another person's saying? One thing that's always true is how the person's feeling about it. So whether we think what they're saying is right or factual or not, there's an emotion behind that. So if we can identify and name the emotion and ask them if that's what they're feeling, That's always the truth about it. So why validate? When we validate, we communicate that we understand, or we're trying to understand the other person's perspective, and this reduces negative reactivity in the other person, and it reduces escalation of conflict. So there's this whole chart on how to validate, but the basics behind it is notice what the person's feeling, or what you think they're feeling, by looking at their behavior and expression, and reflect back either the content of what they're saying or the emotion that they're feeling, or both. So one thing, you can paraphrase what they're saying and repeat it back to them, be like, am I hearing you right? And you can also ask, it seems like you're feeling anger and disgust right now. Is that true? And then you let them share their feelings with you, and then you reflect that back to them. So letting the other person know you hear what they're saying, you understand how they feel. You might not agree with any of it, but you hear it. And before you say anything else, and it's like, stop the conversation, validate the person, reflect back what they're saying, and then go on to your part. Because if you go on to your part without acknowledging that they have feelings and that they have a point of view, they're going to be upset because they don't feel heard. And are such an important piece of all of interpersonal communication is making the other person feel heard, because you want to feel heard. Working with couples, the biggest thing I noticed is that people don't feel heard. They don't feel heard, understood, or seen. And when you validate the other person, it starts to open up that very blocked channel of feeling heard, seen, understood. And it starts to make communication a lot easier. Yeah.
Jesse,
Yeah.
really quickly, I just want to say, that last bit about what we see over and over in the work we do with couples. We just want to hit the pause button on that for a second, and also recognize that we can help you change that, right?
Yeah.
These skills can help
Mhm.
just transform relationships.
Yeah. And it's helping yourself. Like, when you're doing this, you're helping yourself, because you're reducing the negative reactivity of the other person, and you're reducing escalation of the conflict. So the basic formula that I like to use is mirror, validate, empathize. This is what I like to use. So, like, first, paraphrasing, what I'm hearing you say is blank. Validating, it makes sense to me that you feel that way given that blank. And then empathizing, just, you don't have to do this verbally, but like, it makes sense that they're angry right now, even though I don't agree with like what they're saying. Like, it makes sense that they would feel angry, because if I didn't feel like I was being valued, or whatever their thing is, I would also feel angry. So just being able to like repeat back the emotion, and then either verbally or non-verbally be like, you know what, it kind of makes sense that they feel this way. So lots of reasons to validate. It reduces pressure to prove who's right. It reduces anger. It reduces negative reactivity. It makes other people more receptive to what we have to say. So how many times do you not feel listened to? And like, there's so many situations where both people don't feel listened to. And when you validate each other, you're both more receptive to hear what the other person has to say. So it's really like in your best interest. So we've gone through one skill of each module so far. These are some examples. This isn't actually all the skills, but these are some examples of some other skills that in each module. What DBT Skills Class looks like, our 10-week program, is we're going to talk about the skills in class. We're going to have class conversations, class dialogue. I'm going to ask particular questions for people to process and talk to about together. We're going to do some group activities. There's going to be a slideshow always. And then I'm going to give you homework from this book, which is kind of like the DBT Bible, I would say. It's the DBT skills training handouts and worksheets. And I'll give you a few pages. I try not to overwhelm people with homework. It's usually 2 to 3 pages of practicing a skill and recording how it was for you. So it's really not that overwhelming. And then when we get back in class, we talk about how that was for people.
Okay, that was incredible and so much information and just a small taste of what, you can expect to experience in the class. Jesse, would you mind just kind of just tell us how much will people have to share or, be involved? What should they expect as far as what the experience will be like?
So it's really up to you as an individual, like how much you want to share about your personal experience. The class is more about focusing on the present and dealing with painful emotions in the moment and what we can do to get through them. But we do not ignore the fact that all of our emotion regulation, not all of it, but most of our emotion dysregulation issues are based in childhood trauma and other traumas, because our bodies get rewired by trauma to be in fight or flight instead of sympathetic nervous system. So we're going to talk a lot about the nervous system in the class too. I talk a lot about that. So we have the underlying knowledge that a lot of this dysregulation in emotion is based in trauma. However, we don't spend that much time processing each other's trauma or sharing our own trauma stories. It's more about talking about what's happening for you right now in the moment. Last week when you had an argument with your partner, last week when you had an action urge for harming yourself, and talking through that instance. It's not to
So,
say that we don't talk, it's not to say that you're not allowed to talk about traumatic experiences. It's just that that's not the focus of the class. And we also don't want to trigger other people in the class by sharing details that might dysregulate a person, so that when they get off of the Zoom call, they feel really overwhelmed.
so you're saying that you might share that you were triggered during an
Yeah.
argument with your spouse, but
Yeah.
you wouldn't be sharing any details or,
Yeah. It would
information.
be like, yeah, it's definitely appropriate to be like, I was triggered with an argument from my spouse because because my mother used to talk to me that way, and that was always really traumatizing for me as a child. That's like perfectly appropriate. But what we don't do in this class is like launch into more explicit trauma memories, because we don't want to, this isn't group therapy, so we don't want to trigger the other people in the room.
Yeah. And we, just hope that that makes sense, that
Yeah.
there is some sharing because, this is really a modern approach to addressing mental health and well-being and personal growth and development, right? So there is a little bit of, you know, getting used to the idea of the classes are online and, these are the topics, right?
Yeah.
And you don't
Yeah.
fully know what to expect, but I hope that our talk today, gives people just a little taste of you and, what we're about. And it's really exciting to learn and to watch people learn. And I have to just throw in there because I have, been in the class with you and I help you with the class, but you're the leader, and how much I've learned and, seen in the results of the students who oftentimes take the class more than once, um, and who consistently report validation, wise mind. What would you say the third one is? The third top rated skill that people come out with?
I think for a lot of people, it's also the crisis survival skills for the distress tolerance. Yeah, which we didn't talk about today, but is a really big part of things. Yeah.
So, yeah, well, if you have anything else you would like to throw out there about the presentation today, feel free to wrap it up for us. And hopefully people watching will reach out and, consider joining us.
Yeah, I guess just to reiterate, the structure of the class is 10 weeks. This is how it's broken down. Um, I always am open to people contacting me between lessons and coming, like having like a 15-minute check-in call to troubleshoot using their skills. I always, there's also like a site for the class where I put recaps of every session, and I put a lot of videos and resources for people to use throughout the week. But yeah, I feel like that's a good intro kind of like overview of, what the 4 modules are, and one example of a skill from each module.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you, Jesse, and look forward to seeing you again soon in our next DBT class.
Thank you.